White Man Can't Jump is a pretty strange game for the Atari Jaguar, by which I mean that it's the only game that I know of on Atari's Swansong Big Cat that's a film licensed game.
And I know what you just thought, but Retro RITF, what about Alien vs Predator? Well, I thought that too, but the film actually came out in 2004, a decade, or just under a decade, after this game. And Highlander on the Jaguar CD was a TV series, not a film, just to preempt you on that one. This game also fits into a kind of weird other niche category of Jaguar game, being one of only two arcade-style basketball games for this machine, which is quite a rarity when you consider that the Jaguar doesn't often have more than one game in the genre from third parties, although both basketball games were produced for the Jaguar by High Voltage Software. It's unfortunate for White Men Can't Jump that its stablemate on the Jaguar is none other than NBA Jam! An arcade classic from 1993, with its loud, in-your-face, high-speed gameplay and memorable one-liner commentary. Comparatively, White Men Can't Jump always faced an uphill challenge. Now, sorry to disappoint all you folks who watch this show because I have a tendency to root for the underdog, but here there's not going to be a fourth quarter turnaround, I'm afraid. NBA Jam is the far superior game, and I'm not going to argue that in it's any other way in a million years. White Men Can't Jump simply can't compete with it, but it does have a really rough reputation with the general gaming public and with Jaguar fans as being one of the worst games ever made. I'm going to be asking whether or not that's a fair assessment in my review today. So let's go hit the court. Now I'll be straight up here. I haven't seen the film. Hell, I didn't even know it existed until I started researching for this review, so I don't really feel I can comment much on how close it is to the film. Although I will say that thankfully it does seem to be enough of a game in its own right and hasn't been tied down to the license too much. By which I mean that it's about basketball. The premise of the game is that you, as one of a roster of 14 teams, are a street b-ball team that hit the half-court scene running. You want to go to the major street tourney, but one problem. You don't have the dough to go. Enter a couple of shady-looking loan sharks who loan you 500 big American bucks to bet on yourself, earning your way up to the $5,000 you need to enter the tournament. The catch is that you get a maximum of 30 games to get the money back, or you're in major trouble with the money boys. Now, as I've said, I haven't seen the film, but if this is the plot, I really want to get and watch it. I'll admit that I'm a sucker for sports films at the best of times, but this one throws in an interesting twist. I like to imagine it's some kind of half-court Blues Brothers, complete with rad 90s tude. Nevertheless, it's a great motivator to play the game, and I actually prefer this over NBA Jam's tournament mode, where you basically just have a win-loss record and keep playing different teams. The teams available for you to choose from are many and varied, with hip and edgy names like the Metalheads or the Slammers. Apart from those names and the character sprites looking slightly, and I emphasise slightly, different, I honestly didn't notice a huge difference between how each team plays, despite the fact that each player has 3 stat bars beneath each character for shooting, energy and speed. The best part about the teams is probably that if you got a brand new copy, like I did, or yours came with a manual, then you can read all the team bios, and it's a nice little touch to know all of the reasons for starting their own team and trying to enter the tournament, like wanting to start their own rap label or to fund their own wedding, and it helps give it a bit more character beyond having, I don't know, say 30 NBA teams, and yeah, there's going to be a lot of comparison to NBA Jam here. After you pick your team and get your cash, it's time to hit the court. There are 4 different courts in the game, plus a special tournament court that you play on if you get to the final. And at any given time in the tournament mode, 3 of them will have a team on. The money you have to bet, as well as the team is on the court, is displayed. Select one and you're all set to slam dunk. You know, whilst I like the variety of courts on offer from, the 4 different settings, I've got to be honest and say that NBA Jam's single court might not be as varied, but it's got a lot more attention to detail in it. After this, unfortunately, the game goes downhill somewhat, getting Courtside, the game presents you with a pseudo 3D half court with an okay background and 4 of the muddiest looking sprites I've ever seen.
Now, I'm certainly not trying to be racist, but if you look at every single sprite, black, white, or anyone else for that matter, it looks more washed out than a centre playing British Pro League baseball. And yes, we do have a Pro League, it's just not very good at all.
This is one of my major concerns. The problem with it is it gets dull to look at very quickly, and the biggest issue with that is that the similarity between each sprite means I often get really confused as to whether or not a player is actually on my team or not. Not that it makes a huge difference, as you'll rarely tap the pass button. It's often better to just run around until you find an opening to shoot. The match play is a little bit slower than its big cat counterpart, NBA Jam, and I do feel it makes a pleasant change of pace from the hyper-turbo gameplay that game offers, as it feels a little bit more realistic, although not too much, and sticks true to its arcadey roots. I do appreciate that in this version of basketball you can make physical contact with people, by which I mean you punch them right in the face to make a tackle. Having said that, it doesn't often seem to have the desired effect, or quite often the ball bounces off completely disproportionate to the movement of the player or the direction, or sometimes they don't actually drop it at all. Plus, I'll find it really hard to pull off for one glaring reason: the angle of the camera. The camera moves up and down depending on where the ball is and what you're doing, position of the player you're controlling, yada yada yada. That wouldn't be so bad, but often it can obscure your view and makes it really tough to see what's what. It's not quite as awful as people seem to make out, but nonetheless it really bugs me. My final big gripe is that shooting, the largest aspect of basketball itself, seems to be disappointingly random. Not completely random, of course. If you're close to the hoop, you have a better chance of scoring. If you're straight in front of it, same again. The biggest gripe I have seems to be dictated less by your skill as a player and more based on random chance, taking your positioning and other such factors into account. It's kind of like dice rolls in Dungeons and Dragons, except that the difference in Dungeons and Dragons is that it makes sense, because it's not a direct action that you personally can influence, you just roll a dice. In White Men Can't Jump, however, it is a direct action. Thankfully, gameplay is made tolerable by the fact that matches tend to not last very long at all, normally around 5 to 7 minutes, but it can be altered in the menu by up to 20 minutes, or you can play first to 21 points or first to 30 points, whichever have you, and again that normally takes around 5 to 7 minutes. It's a perfect amount of time in my opinion, compensating somewhat for the slower action, but without dragging a match on past its welcome. And playing games with a tight score can actually get surprisingly tense. It's easy to get invested in it when you've got like a really close match with a big bucks riding on the game. I've really gotten into some matches before, finding myself flinging my hands up or throwing cursors at the telly. I did feel it was a little anticlimactic at the end of the tournament mode, as this huge tournament turns out to be just one game, and I was pretty disappointed. Plus, on a little side note, the piano music that plays in the background, it's not particularly intrusive, and this goes for every match by the way, but it really kind of throws me out of that immersion zone sometimes, and I find it pretty annoying. So, honestly, I don't think it's as bad as people make it out to be. No, really. I don't. I mean, sure, it's, and not as good as NBA Jam in pretty much every respect, but there's more reason to get behind a team in this game, and it's easier to play a tournament mode. There's a longer investment. I mean, sure, the graphics are really bland, and the camera angle is really tough and erratic to sort of play with at times, but it's by no means unplayable, as some people may have you believe, and I certainly get some enjoyment out of it when I play it, every so often. And so the ruling on the court is below average. It's not particularly appealing to the eye at all, even when you look at the time it came out and the system it was released on. But the game shines through with its character behind the scenes, like the character bios and the names and stuff like that. Little touches. I don't find it as easy to play in one sitting as NBA Jam, but I feel it has a longer lastability over, say, a month or a year. Plus, it's cheaper than NBA Jam, and if you see it for a reasonable price, to be perfectly honest, I'd take the chance. You might end up with a backcourt three-pointer at the Horn.
Or to translate from rad b-ball lingo, it's one hell of a surprise. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.